Grief doesn't always come with sympathy. Sometimes it comes with silence, with people who change the subject, or tell you to move on, or simply disappear. And when you're over 60, it can feel even lonelier, because the world assumes you're strong, that you've been through this before. But grief doesn't get easier with age, it gets quieter. And when no one around you seems to understand, the healing has to begin within. This video is for the days when you feel invisible, when you carry the weight alone, because healing is possible, even in silence, even without permission, even now. If this video speaks to something you've felt but never said out loud, please like, share, and subscribe. You're not alone, and your healing matters. Let's create a space where grief is honored, not rushed, where your story can be felt, respected, and slowly rebuilt, one quiet step at a time. You wake up and the world feels a little unfamiliar. The person who used to be there, gone. The house feels bigger, quieter. Time stretches differently. In my moments like these, when grief feels like a fog that won't lift, experts explain that the brain and heart both need one thing above all: rhythm. A steady, repeatable act. Something small that tells your body, your mind, and your spirit, you are still here. This is what researchers and grief counselors call an anchor ritual. Doctors have observed that after loss, the body goes into a kind of emotional disorientation. Sleep becomes fragmented, appetite shifts, emotions arrive without warning. And for seniors, especially those living alone, these patterns can become overwhelming fast. That's why creating one calming, predictable ritual, done at the same time, in the same way, can be quietly life-saving. Experts explain that the human nervous system craves certainty during grief. Not answers, not solutions, but moments where the brain can rest. When you drink a cup of tea at the same table each morning, when you walk the same garden path, when you light a small candle or say a quiet prayer each night, you're not just passing time. You're teaching your body that despite the emotional chaos, there is still one thing it can count on. That stillness is what helps calm racing thoughts, steady the heartbeat, and regulate the stress hormone cortisol, which often spikes in grieving seniors. Studies show that even 5 minutes a day of a grounding habit can lower anxiety levels, improve digestion, and help stabilize mood. These aren't big, flashy changes. They are soft, gentle moments that remind your nervous system that the world, while different, still holds something familiar. And when the days all start to blur together, when time feels like it's dragging or rushing or skipping, this one, chosen ritual, becomes your anchor. Grief doesn't move in straight lines. It arrives in waves. Some days you'll feel steady, other days you won't. But that's where the power of a ritual lies. You do it regardless of how you feel. You walk that loop around your block whether it's raining or not. You water the same plant each morning whether you're in tears or smiling. This act becomes a container, not to trap your feelings, but to hold them gently, to give you a shape to pour them into. And over time, that container becomes a lifeline. Doctors who work closely with widowed seniors often report that those who develop small rituals heal more steadily. They describe fewer panic attacks, less nighttime waking, and a stronger ability to reach out to others. It's not the ritual itself that fixes the grief. It's the message it sends to your soul. You still belong in this day. This doesn't mean pretending you're okay. It means creating one small place in the day where your pain doesn't have to be fixed, just witnessed. Where you are allowed to be exactly where you are. No masks, no rush. Just a warm drink, a breath of morning air, a single line in a journal. Done again and again until it becomes part of your healing. There's no perfect ritual, only one that feels gentle enough to keep. It doesn't matter what others think. It matters that it feels like yours. Because when no one else understands what you're carrying, this quiet habit becomes the companion that does. So if today feels scattered, or the grief feels too big to speak, start small. Choose one act. Do it again tomorrow. Then again, and again. Let that simple choice become the thread that slowly leads you forward, not out of the grief, but through it, with steadiness, with softness, and with strength you didn't know you still had. You've likely heard it, even if no one says it outright. You're strong, you've been through worse. Or the quiet silence that falls when you bring up your grief. As we grow older, the world often assumes we've become experts in loss, that we've learned how to carry pain without letting it show. But researchers are clear. Suppressing grief, especially to meet other people's expectations, doesn't make it go away. It buries it, and buried grief doesn't heal. It lingers, it hardens, and it quietly weighs down your heart, your body, your days. Experts have observed that many seniors fall into a dangerous pattern after loss, not because they're cold, but because they've been conditioned over time to believe that breaking down is a weakness, that grief must be tucked away quickly, especially if children, neighbors, or others are watching. And so, without meaning, they begin to deny themselves the full expression of their sorrow. But doctors explain that grief is not a performance. It doesn't need to be tidy. It doesn't need to look like anyone else's process. And it absolutely doesn't need to be silent. In fact, the healthiest grief, the kind that slowly heals instead of silently wounds, is often messy, unpredictable, and deeply personal. Researchers studying grief in older adults have found that the pressure to stay strong often delays healing. It turns grief into guilt. You might feel like you're supposed to be over it, like you shouldn't cry anymore, like you should be grateful for the years you had, instead of mourning what was lost. But the truth is, gratitude and grief can live side by side. You can honor the life that was shared while still aching for the one you've lost. Doctors working with seniors have noted that healing improves dramatically when people are simply given permission to feel fully, without filters. That might mean talking about your loved one often, even if others seem uncomfortable. It might mean writing them letters, sitting with their belongings, crying in the middle of the day for no reason at all. These aren't signs of weakness. They are signs of honesty. They are the small, necessary acts of a heart still loving in the absence of presence. Grief, when pushed down, doesn't stay quiet. It shows up in the body, in tightness in the chest, in fatigue, in forgetfulness, in loneliness that doesn't seem to lift. That's why medical professionals urge older adults not to judge themselves for how long they mourn or how openly they do it. Your grief is valid. Your timeline is yours. And healing does not require you to pretend that everything is fine. Some seniors also feel the added pressure of being the rock for their family. They avoid showing emotion because they don't want to upset their children or grandchildren. But experts explain that when elders allow themselves to grieve visibly, it gives younger people permission to do the same. It teaches them that sorrow isn't shameful. It's human. If your grief doesn't look like your friends, or if your sadness lingers longer than people expect, that doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means something mattered to you. And the depth of that meaning deserves to be felt, not rushed, not hidden. So if today you need to cry, let it come. If you need to speak their name again and again, speak it. If you need to scream into a pillow, go ahead. You are not weak for feeling. You are not broken for mourning. You are human. And your path through this is allowed to be as real, as raw, and as different as it needs to be. Because grief isn't just pain, it's proof of love. And giving yourself permission to feel it fully, honestly, and without apology is one of the most courageous healing things you can do today. You carry so many words inside, things you wish you could say, feelings too heavy for small talk, thoughts that rise in the quiet but never find a voice. Doctors have observed that for many seniors, especially those grieving in silence, the pain isn't just about the loss. It's about the lack of space to express it. That's why researchers now point to one simple, powerful tool that helps the brain, the body, and the spirit begin to heal: writing. Experts explain that expressive writing, the act of putting thoughts and feelings onto paper, helps grieving adults process emotions they can't always speak. It's not about being a poet. It's not about grammar or punctuation. It's about unloading what's sitting on your chest, especially when you feel like no one around you would truly understand, or when you're too tired to talk, or when you're afraid that saying something out loud would make the pain feel too real. Studies show that seniors who journal regularly, just 10 to 15 minutes a day, report noticeable improvements in sleep, energy, memory, and even digestion. The science behind it is simple but profound. When you write, your brain shifts from emotional chaos into structured thought. You begin to sort, to name, to make sense. And in doing so, your nervous system calms, your heartbeat slows, your mind softens. Doctors who work closely with grieving patients often encourage what they call free writing, just putting pen to paper without a plan. No filters, no rules. You can write to the person you lost. You can write to yourself. You can write letters that will never be sent, or pages no one will ever read. The value isn't in the audience. It's in the release. One study published in the Journal of Aging and Mental Health found that older adults who wrote privately about their grief for just 4 days showed significantly lower levels of loneliness and anxiety weeks later. Writing doesn't erase the loss, but it helps give form to the formless ache. It pulls what's locked inside into the open, where it can begin to breathe. Some seniors keep a small notebook by the bed. Others write each morning with their coffee. Some do it once a week, others every day. There is no wrong way. What matters is that you give yourself a place where the words can land, where your grief doesn't have to be explained or minimized or made palatable for someone else's comfort, where the truth of how you feel, confused, sad, angry, tired, grateful, broken, can exist freely and without judgment. Experts explain that this kind of emotional processing doesn't just ease the heart, it also helps sharpen the mind. Seniors who write regularly often report clearer thinking, better focus, and fewer memory lapses. That's because unspoken grief takes up space in the brain. It clouds decision-making. It drains energy. But when you put it down on paper, even a little at a time, it loosens its grip. Doctors have also seen expressive writing reduce physical tension, muscle pain, headaches, restlessness. That's the body's way of saying thank you. Because when you hold too much in, your body holds it too. But when you let it out, something shifts. Not all at once, not magically, but gently, bit by bit. So if today you feel overwhelmed or lost or like you're carrying something too big to share, pick up a pen. Start with a sentence. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be brave. Just let it be real. Because in the quiet space between your thoughts and your hand, healing can begin. And that healing is yours. No matter who understands, you are not. Your story matters, your feelings matter. And every time you write what you can't say out loud, you take one more step toward making peace with what was, and toward discovering the strength still within you now. ChatGPT said, you loved them deeply. They were part of your days, your rhythm, your sense of self. And now without them, everything feels quieter, emptier. But not just on the outside, inside too. Doctors and grief counselors explain that for many seniors, grief goes beyond sorrow. It reaches into identity. It makes you question who you are without the person you once built your life around. And when that question is left unanswered, it can keep you stuck, not just in sadness, but in silence. Experts have observed that older adults often merge their identity with a spouse, a sibling, a lifelong friend. The roles we play, wife, husband, caregiver, best friend, become part of how we see ourselves. And when that person is gone, it can feel like a piece of you is gone too. You might say things like, I don't know what to do with myself, or I'm just going through the motions, not realizing that this loss is deeper than grief. It's a loss of role, of purpose, of belonging. What makes this even harder is the guilt. The guilt that creeps in when you try to move forward, when you laugh at something funny, when you think about joining a new group, when you take a trip, or buy new clothes, or simply feel okay for a moment. That guilt whispers, you shouldn't be happy without them. It convinces you that honoring their memory means staying still, staying sad, staying in the past. But grief counselors urge a different truth. Rebuilding your identity after loss isn't betrayal, it's survival. And more than that, it's healing. Studies show that seniors who allow themselves to create new routines, explore new interests, or even form new connections after loss experience better emotional health, fewer physical ailments, and a greater sense of peace. Not because they've moved on, but because they've learned to carry the memory with them, rather than being defined by it. Experts explain that one of the most powerful things a grieving person can do is ask, "Who am I now?" Not in despair, but in curiosity. What parts of you are still here? What have you always wanted to do but never had time for? What brings even the smallest flicker of light to your day? This isn't about starting over. It's about starting with what you have now, with what still matters to you, and with the courage to keep showing up for life, even in the face of absence. Doctors have seen that when seniors feel free to explore life again without judgment or apology, the weight of grief shifts. It doesn't disappear, but it becomes something you carry with more strength and less fear. And often, that shift begins with a single decision: to do something new, to choose a different route to the store, to try a new recipe, to volunteer, to make art, to speak your truth, to take up space in the world again, not as half of a whole, but as a full person still worthy of growth and joy. This step takes bravery, because grief doesn't just change your routines, it changes how you see yourself. You may feel like you're leaving them behind when you redefine who you are. But experts explain that true healing happens when you allow their memory to become part of your new self, not a reason to deny it. You don't stop loving them, you carry them forward in your choices, in your strength, and in the life you continue to live. So if you've been hesitating to step forward, worried that doing so means forgetting them, pause and breathe. Rebuilding your identity is not about forgetting. It's about remembering who you are too. And that remembering, that gentle, guilt-free rebuilding, might be the greatest way to honor the love you shared. You are still here. You are still becoming. And there is no shame in learning how to live again, not for them, not for anyone else, but for you. Because you matter. And your story isn't finished yet. You may feel like no one around you truly understands what you're going through. People mean well. They ask how you're doing. They tell you to take care. They offer kind words. But deep down, you still feel alone. Because the kind of grief you're carrying, especially after a long life with someone, isn't something most people can grasp unless they've lived it. That's why doctors and researchers now strongly encourage something many seniors overlook: connecting with others who have been there too. Experts explain that one of the most healing steps in grief isn't found in advice. It's found in shared understanding. Peer-led support groups, whether in person or online, create a space where you don't have to explain everything, where you don't have to pretend you're okay, where a simple nod or a shared story reminds you that what you're feeling isn't strange or weak, it's human. Doctors who work in geriatric mental health have observed a pattern. When seniors are isolated in their grief, symptoms like fatigue, forgetfulness, depression, and even chronic pain worsen. But when they begin speaking to others who've also experienced deep loss, something shifts. Their sleep improves, their appetite steadies, their anxiety lowers, not because the grief goes away, but because the weight of carrying it alone is finally shared. Studies show that support groups for grieving seniors help validate pain in a way few other resources can. In these groups, no one tells you to move on. No one suggests you should feel better by now. Instead, you hear others describe the same quiet moments of heartache, the same struggle to adjust to daily routines, the same guilt for smiling at a joke or finding joy again. And suddenly, your experience no longer feels like something's wrong with you. It feels normal, because it is. Experts also highlight the unique benefit of online communities for older adults. For those who are homebound, live in rural areas, or simply don't feel ready to attend in person, online grief circles provide immediate access to comfort. Many seniors are now finding healing conversations through simple tools like Zoom or private forums. Even short weekly check-ins have been shown to lift mood and reduce loneliness significantly. Doctors explain that connection is not a luxury after loss. It's a form of medicine. Human beings are wired for relationship, and after losing someone central to your life, the nervous system itself enters a state of disorientation. That's why hearing another voice say, "I know exactly how that feels," can soothe something no medication can touch. This isn't about replacing the person you lost. It's about remembering that while grief isolates, community reconnects. That even in your pain, you still belong. That your voice still matters. That there are others right now, waiting to share their story and hear yours. Some seniors worry that joining a group will make them feel worse, that talking about it will reopen wounds. But experts reassure that when the space is safe and supportive, the opposite happens. Talking releases tension, listening creates perspective, and most importantly, it reminds you that your grief doesn't make you a burden. It makes you human. You may find that you're not just helped by others, but that you help them too. By showing up, by sharing your journey, by being real. Doctors say this sense of mutual support is especially important later in life. It reinforces dignity, purpose, connection, the very things grief can take away if left unchecked. So if you felt alone in your pain, if the silence in your house has gotten too loud, know this. There are others out there who carry the same ache, and they're waiting to sit with you in it. Not to fix it, not to change it, just to hold space for it. Because sometimes healing doesn't begin with answers. It begins with, "Me too." You don't have to do this by yourself. You were never meant to. And even now, even in your loss, you still belong to something greater than the pain. You belong to a circle of people who understand. Let them in. Let them walk beside you. Because connection may be the bridge between surviving and truly living again.